We come to the fifth presentation of the Parayana, which is Sanskrit. Para means above or beyond. Yana is way. Like the Mahayana is the great way. And we have already begun to talk about how the Mahayana has its roots, its seed in St. Thomas, who went to India in 41 AD and was in the far south of India, where the shipping from the Egyptian ports of Myos, Hormos, and Berenice would clear the Red Sea and the islands of Socotra and go across in season to the southern tip of India, to the Malabar coast. And there were trading adventures going on since the time of Queen Hatshepsut, 1500 BC. And they began very large because Hatshepsut was really quite extraordinary. And when she would send trading vessels, she would send 60 at a time. She really did things big. So by the time of 1550 years later, when St. Thomas went to India, in that time, in the Hellenistic period, Alexandria had taken over what the power structure of the pharaohs had and established the Ptolemaic structure. And the international trading part of the Ptolemaic international structure were Jews. They were Jewish. Alexander the Great, when he conquered the city of Tyre, Tyre, Tyre had its shipping power in an island off the coast of Phoenicia, and wherever they established colonies, and they established them all through the eastern Mediterranean. They founded Carthage, they founded what became Marseille, they went out into the Atlantic Ocean as far as the Cameroons in Africa, and up the Spanish, Portuguese coasts. So they were extremely adept at this. But the Jews had been taken along by Alexander because they had, at his time, already 2,000 years experience with international trade. With Sargon of Akkad, his trading kingdom became the Fertile Crescent, linking not only the Persian Gulf with the Mediterranean Sea, but expanded all the way out to the island of Cyprus and expanded eastward along the coasts of what is today Iran and Pakistan into India, so that Sargon the Great, by 2300 BC, had an international trading empire between Cyprus and the Indus River civilizations. So that Alexander the Great, who was a very deep student of history, understood that the Semitic, North Semitic peoples, especially who became Jews with Abraham, they really knew how to deal with many languages and many currencies and to find a common denominator among all of them and be able to carry on what was really almost a world-class ability. And Alexander the Great decided to push as far as India to the east, and when he was a little older, when he was in his late 30s, he would push all the way west as far as the British Ireland islands. He had a a Marseille descendant of the Phoenicians, who was a master sailor, who circumambulated the British Isles, including Ireland, and went as far as Iceland out into the North Atlantic by 320 BC, 320s BC. And so Alexander was capable and prepared his trading empire for his world of one mankind. The Greek word for that was the oikumene, from which we get the Latin ecumene, which meant ecumenical, including everyone. That there was a family of man, and that one of the stays was the great vision that there was an ecumene, and the spread of an international world mankind business network sustained that. That the military might have been the ability to pioneer conflicts, but the settled part of it, like we would say today, the global intercorporate world, is a business world, not necessarily sustaining itself by military means, but tempering its expansion and its suzerainty over others in terms of not some one, but in terms of what we would call today a multinational global investiture. And that's what Alexander had, and used the international Hebrew Hellenistic Jews. They were not yet rabbinical Jews. In 41 AD, that was already 50 years before, there was the Council of Jamnia that ushered in the rabbinic Judaism. The Hellenistic Judaism was totally international from the times of Sargon on. And so for almost 2,500 years, Hellenistic Judaism was the international coin of the family of man realm. And so one has to understand that the creme de la creme of Hellenistic Judaism, Jesus, was not only a worldwide visionary, but going off into distances so far that in the Pistis Sophia, he answers Mary Magdalene when she asks, what is the real context of all of this for man? He says, everything that you see and can see, the planets, the stars, there is a distance so far that all of that will be seemingly like a speck. And then he does this transform for her 6 times, so that in the 7th range, one understands that it is a cosmos of unbelievable vastness, and that the family of man is a very important participant in being able to cross the threshold from this world to the next worlds, plural, which is all possible worlds. And that threshold is a gap. And that one, in teaching about reality, teaches the vision of how to go across the gap and reach the other shore. By now we should say the other shores, big time plural. There are more galaxies in the cosmos than there are sands of the Ganges. The vastness is incredible. It was St. Thomas that brought this Mahayana seed to India, first in the south, in what today is the Kerala province, and then quickly went to the north, where the Hellenistic Greco-Roman kingdoms established by Alexander the Great were still flourishing. And under invitation by Gondophares, Gondophares had written to Jesus would he send him an architect to build a palace that would be worthy of this new vision of man. And Jesus, after the resurrection, made sure that there were disciples that were sent in places that would highlight the spectrum. And one of them was sending Thomas to India, to land in Kerala, and then to go to the north to Gandhara to be the architect, because Thomas was an architect, so that the beginnings of the Mahayana had a double attractor, like a butterfly effect and chaos theory. It had this ability to be simultaneously tuned in the far south and in the far north. In Kerala, initially, but across the narrower peninsula of southern India to the other coast, where today is largely the very large city. It used to be called for a long time Madras. Now it's called Chennai. And it is in Madras to Kerala that one finds a trek across that peninsula point of India. And one of the earliest cities founded by St. Thomas is still called Salem. There is a Salem, India. Just south of Madras, where the Adyar River runs into the Bay of Bengal, part of the large Indian Ocean, is the mound that has the tomb of St. Thomas, and it's still there. It was visited by Marco Polo and described in his travels very, very much. Just south of that is where the Sri Aurobindo ashram, great ashram, is on that same coast. And if you go a little bit further south, there is a series of islands or islets called Adam's Rib that span an arc and go to ancient Sri Lanka, to Ceylon. And so that whole region was developed as a sympathetic pair, a tuned pair with the North Indian of Gandhara. And in order to seed Gandhara, the far east of the north is what is today Bangladesh. And it's there in that Bangladesh region that some of the Brahmins were extremely sophisticated, and they were able to produce one of the greatest men of the age, whose name is Ashvaghosha. We've talked about how his name means, Asva in Sanskrit is horse, and Ghosha is the sound of the whinnying of the horse, the triumphal, elegant nobleness of it. And Asvaghosha was arguing against the old Buddhists, the Theravada, the elders' path. The difference between a Vada and a Yana is that a Vada is a path. It's like a line of development that one follows. And the Yana, the way, is like a field. It's like a matrix. It is quite a different scalar. And we'll talk a lot today about the difference between a lineage and a way. When Jesus would talk about what he was doing, he would talk about the way. And one of the famous quotes is, "I am the way." entering through me, one enters into the way. It's not a vada, it's not a path. It's a way. And so the Mahayana was the great way. And Ashvaghosha had gone to argue in northwest India against the champion of this new Mahayana, who was saying, and his name was Parshva, and Parshva said, I have learned from St. Thomas the great way. And you are mistaken in arguing because you're arguing against a vada. You're completely absorbed then in both your arguments and your mental state that it is not pro or con a vada or any kind of a path. The way is like an infinite field which has a particular affinity with the zero field of nature, which nevertheless mysteriously is a fertile zero field. And Ashvaghosha was converted to the Mahayana and wrote the first great book on it, The Awakening of Faith in the Mahayana. You will never find faith, in Sanskrit faith is Shraddha. You will never find any Buddhist sutra that talks about faith. No one in the Theravada ever talked about faith. It was the method of the practice. And it was a remembered, passed on tradition by the Theras, the elders. So that the elder way is the way in which we learned from the Buddha. We learned because we memorized his teachings, and when we wrote them down, they became the sutras. And that sutra in Sanskrit means thread. It means the thread of integral continuity. And so all of the sutras were really the integral continuity that is passed on exactly and accurately from the Buddha. But the Buddha was, as we would say, using a Tolkien word, he was eucatastrophically, that is a catastrophe that's happy. He was eucatastrophically happy in his complexity, so that one can learn to read not only between the lines in sutras, but one can be holding the thread of a sutra and sense its vibration. And that the vibration of that sutra sends out a resonance that has eventually a scalar of harmonics. And one learns to do what we call today in mathematics for some while, a harmonic analysis of the sutra by its resonant sets. And one of the tone keys to a resonant set is to understand time. If you do not understand time, you do not understand space. And if you do not understand time or then space, you do not understand what we call the universe. And not understanding that, you have no beginning of apperception of the cosmos, and thus to you, hidden under layer upon layer upon layer, is reality. The great way is the way across that impasse of the gap, getting into the other shore and wakefulness itself into consciousness. The difference between wakefulness is that it can have a physiological basis. You can wake up from sleeping. You can stop dreaming and come to. But wakefulness is to dreaming and sleeping like consciousness is to wakefulness. And so there is a quality that emerges where the early Mahayana geniuses were actually architects in a way, like St. Thomas and coming into Parshva. And with Ashvaghosha, he had the architecture of showing the Mahayana. And later on, the great architectural developer of the Mahayana was Nagarjuna. And Nagarjuna was from the far north of the Bay of Bengal coast, north from Madras, is the Andhra province, and it has two great rivers that come into the Bay of Bengal. One is the Krishna River, going all the way into central India, and the other one goes all the way into almost the depths of the center of India. And it was there on the banks of that river that a great stupa complex was built by Nagarjuna as the architect, and it was called Amaravati. And Amaravati is a Mahayana transform of what was built in central India near the beginnings of that great river. And that center was called Sanchi. And Sanchi was built by the great Ashoka, who reigned in India for over half a century. And it was the Buddhist Greco version of the old Theravada. And Ashoka was spared being killed in all the warfare of the sons of the Alexander the Great of India, who took over and had so many sons by so many different women that they were constantly fighting each other and killing each other off as soon as he passed away. And Ashoka was scot-free from that because he was a mulatto. He was half black from the center of India, in that Deccan desert region. One of the man who taught me the Bhagavad Gita at the University of Wisconsin, a soil engineer, was from Nagpur, which is the city in the center of the Deccan area, the desert. And his name was Sudarshan Puri. And he was dark, he was black, like an African, but he was Indian, an Indian black. And so the mother of Ashoka was actually a Greek woman marrying, and Ashoka was born as a mulatto. He had splotchy skin. He had kind of like the golden yellow irises and the short curly hair. And Ashoka, because he was spared from all of the more military brothers, stepbrothers, half-brothers, and so forth, that when he took over, there was a tremendous army, but nobody knew how to run a kingdom. And so Ashoka, when he finally took over, having won the last battles, he disbanded the armies. And he set up at the entrances to this vast Indian kingdom, all of central and northern India, almost down to the southern point of India, in one empire, Ashoka's Maurya empire. And he set up pillars with 4 lion heads at the top and inscribed the Buddhist rules for living on those pillars. They're called the Edicts of Ashoka, and we have them translated. And so anyone entering into India would not only enter into a peaceful empire, but Ashoka made vast roads all across, webbing that whole part of northern India, and then planted along those roads medicinal herbs, fruit trees, places of rest, so that there was a concourse. And for 50 years, there were no conquerors of India, there were no wars in India, there were no armies in India. And he built at Sanchi the great stupa, which had a part of the cremated Buddha's bones that were put there as a kind of a talisman that all of what we are teaching is real, rooted in the bones. That we have a natural base which is truthfully real. And as far as we go from wakefulness to threshold challenges to crossing over this enormous gap into a new consciousness, which is an ecology that brings all of the cycles of nature. Nature's cycle on this planet is such and so. Nature's cycle on jillions of other planets is quite different, but is such and so for them. And so the cosmos is an ecology, whereas the nature of particular worlds is that natural cycle, which has many variations, in fact, variations without end. But what's important is to recognize that when one is crossing over that gap, and the gap is not a link, it's not on any path, all Vadas end. They don't go there. There's nowhere to go. They go nowhere. And so they curl back upon themselves and they reiterate the stages and steps of their path. They do not go into the yana. And so the Mahayana for a long time was extremely difficult until Asvaghosha's great Shraddhapada sutra. They changed sutra so that it was like an introduction. And so it had a little bit different tone. It wasn't just holding the thread, it was holding the live resonances and getting to the harmonic. And Nagarjuna brought out the harmonic of the gap, of the void, of the emptiness. That there is a harmonic of the shunyata, of shunyata. Has no the to it at all. But shunyata is harmonic to what is, tacita, to being, to living, to loving. And that the two together do not form an integral. They form a differential, transform, which has so much transformed juice that it's able to transform a second time into a kaleidoscopic consciousness. So that when you come to what was a refinement of the Mahayana, the Vajrayana, you find in Tibet classic little, they're not very big at all. They are writings that are like the seal. This one is called the Great Seal of Voidness. It was written a long time ago, about 500-600 years ago, by the first Panchen Lama. And it's reprinted here in translation into English. The Library of Tibetan Works and Commentaries. One has to be able to understand in terms of really transformed consciousness. The difference between a differential consciousness, which is visionary, and a kaleidoscopic consciousness, which is historical, is one begins to understand the importance of time forms in this application to keep the pairedness of shunyata and tathata resonantly together. They do not mulch. They do not merge. They're not integrals at all. So that one can learn from someone else who is not on a vada, a path. So if you're on some path, you are missing out, not of the past, you can learn that path, but you're missing out all of the resonances, and then beyond that, the vast harmonics that are possible in reality. And so the Parayana here is to deliver that invitation, that there are gifts beyond number that are real, they are cosmic, they are approachable, and you can begin on paths, plural, but one needs to be able to refine that transformation is strong enough to have a transformation of itself. So that the ancient way in which Alexandrian wisdom, the Hagia Sophia, put it, is that reality is thrice greatest. And someone who can teach on the scalar of thrice greatest has a seal on the truthfulness of the high Dharma. There are dharmas on a path. There are truths. Truth is on the path. But the high Dharma, the Hagia Sophia, is that there is a truthfulness beyond belief, beyond ideation, beyond mentality, that has comprehension. It's prehensile, but prehensile in a very special way. It is shareable. And its shareability is one of the ways that you can test the wind of wisdom. If it's not shareable in a very beautiful way, then it's not the high Dharma. One of the great poets of the high Dharma was Shantideva. His Bodhikaryavitara was written in the 8th century, the 700s, and he has a beautiful way of saying it, and we talked about it a little bit last week. One should not turn from difficulties because of regard for his reputation. One is without rest, protecting that reputation. Whoever wishes to quickly rescue himself and another should practice the supreme mystery, the exchanging of himself with the other. It's the secret exchange of selves that is the high Dharma sharing. The Parayana takes the Mahayana and its revising diamond way, the Vajrayana, and carries it into that hermetic thrice greatest harmonic. The Parayana is upon us invitationally to the dance of reality. Let's take a little break and we'll come right back to it.